If you are not a Barney fan, congrats, most people aren't. But this is probably the most sought after Barney doll ever made. Released in 1990, 2 years before Barney became a global phenomenon, it was produced by Dakin, a company that would grow into one of America's largest plush manufacturers. But shortly after its release, the doll was deemed dangerous enough to be recalled amid fears that it possessed a choking hazard. And that was only the beginning of a much larger, darker story involving massive recalls, corporate collapse, the loss of nearly an entire family, and tragically, multiple deaths. This is the rise, fall, and tragedy of Barney's first toy company. Welcome to the Barney Desk. Before we begin, I want to give a brief content warning. This story involves several real-life tragedies, and I don't want to move into them without acknowledging that first. The details are on screen now, so please take a moment and use your own discretion before continuing. Alright, our story does not actually begin with stuffed animals at all. It begins with guns. In 1955, San Francisco businessman Richard Dakin founded a company importing expensive handcrafted shotguns from Europe. His son Roger joined him 2 years later, and they began looking for ways to expand the business, including importing battery-operated toy trains from Japan. But then, one shipment completely changed the company. A box of trains arrived surrounded by 6 tiny velveteen animals. They weren't part of the order. The manufacturer just simply used them as packing material to protect the trains. It kind of feels incredibly wasteful, but hey, Dakin's employees thought they were cute, and so Roger brought the animals to a nearby department store to see whether anyone would buy them. Turns out, the store immediately ordered hundreds. And suddenly, no one really cared about those trains. Dakin named them Dream Pets. They were brightly colored characters made from cotton velveteen and stuffed with sawdust and straw. They were not especially soft or cuddly, as I'm sure you can imagine, but they were cute, collectible, and most importantly, cheap. They were impulse gifts, the kind of thing that you'd see at the register of a department store. You'd think it was cute and you'd add it to your purchase without really planning to. You don't need to be a genius to guess that sales model worked incredibly well. The original 6 expanded into nearly 20,000 different designs, and by the mid-1960s, Dakin was earning millions almost entirely from stuffed animals. Within a decade, a shotgun importer had become one of America's fastest-growing plush manufacturers because somebody packed a box with the wrong material. But early in that rise, the company was hit by an unimaginable loss. On December 20th, 1966, just days before Christmas, the Dakin family boarded a twin-engine plane in Oakland for a holiday trip to La Paz, Mexico. The flight was also intended to demonstrate the aircraft for Richard Dakin, who was considering purchasing it. After refueling in San Diego, the plane disappeared over the Gulf of California and never reached its destination. An extensive search was conducted by the US Coast Guard, the Air Force, and the Mexican authorities, and eventually, 3 weeks later, in early January 1967, the remains of the plane were found in Baja California in Mexico. All 8 members of the Dakin family, along with the plane's 2 crew members on board, were tragically killed. Roger's only surviving child, 12-year-old Sam, had stayed behind to spend the holiday with family friends. In one flight, Dakin had lost both of its founders and almost an entire generation of the family behind it. The tragedy was felt immediately throughout the company. The board placed Dakin's executive vice president, Harold Miesemann, in charge, while surviving family members, employees, and friends worked together to stop the business from collapsing. And somehow, and you might be surprised, they did more than just preserve it. Under Miesemann, Dakin became one of the most prominent stuffed animal manufacturers in the world. By the late 70s, it was reportedly selling close to 70 million toys across 87 countries. One of Dakin's star salesmen during this period was even Ty Warner, the man who would eventually leave the company and create Beanie Babies. So, in a weird way, Dakin was actually indirectly responsible for one of the largest toy crazes in history. The company expanded beyond Dream Pets into another brand called Huggables, along with puppets, musical toys, crib decorations, and other products designed specifically for babies and young children. But in 1979, one of those infant products would have deadly consequences. Dakin recalled roughly 422,000 stuffed animal mobiles designed to hang from crib posts. The animals were suspended by elastic cords, and those cords could become wrapped around an infant's neck. By the time the Consumer Product Safety Commission revisited the case in 1982, an 11-month-old girl and an 8-month-old boy had died in separate strangulation incidents involving the toys. A government survey also suggested that as many as 180,000 of the recalled mobiles could still be sitting in homes years later, forcing Dakin and the government to launch another warning campaign. It was the darkest event in Dakin's history to that point. Yet somehow, commercially, the company just kept climbing. By the late 1980s, Garfield had become one of its biggest licenses. If Garfield could sit on a desk, hang from a window, or judge you from a shelf, Dakin was the one manufacturing it. And for a while, that worked extremely well. In 1989, company sales reportedly peaked at roughly $225 million. But then, the Garfield craze began cooling off, and Dakin's numbers fell with it. By 1991, revenue had collapsed to around $75 million, and the company had lost more than $50 million across 2 years. Into that collapse stepped businessman Robert Solomon, who purchased control of Dakin in late 1991 and took on the job of trying to turn it around. But even before Solomon took control, Dakin had already began betting on another character. The Lions Group had been releasing Barney and the Backyard Gang directly onto VHS, a locally produced series about a stuffed dinosaur who came to life through a child's imagination. The videos were becoming a regional hit, and naturally, kids wanted the doll from the story to be real. That was the plot of the videos. You cannot just build the whole premise around a stuffed animal and then not sell the stuffed animal. So in 1990, Dakin produced the first officially manufactured Barney plush, initially for members of the Barney fan club. And I love this thing. He's so cute. It's based directly on the props used in the videos, with the long snout, round body, and this adorable little judging side eye. For collectors now, it is one of the definitive pieces of early Barney merchandise. It preserves a version of the character that disappeared before Barney and friends turned him into the global phenomenon that we know today. Prototypes for the Dakin doll even appeared on screen in Barney Goes to School and Rock with Barney. I actually own one of these little guys, and I love him, but you may notice that mine is missing one feature found on the earliest original version. He has no white string forming his mouth. The original doll's smile was created using a loose cord attached across its face. The Lions Group became concerned that it could detach and create a choking hazard, and Dakin, who'd already faced a deadly string-related recall, pulled the doll and redesigned it without the cord. Then, in 1992, Barney and Friends was greenlit and entered production. And you would probably assume they could just use the Dakin doll in the show, right? You know I'm gonna say no. Because of the Children's Television Act of 1990, PBS had strict guidelines against children's programs becoming what were essentially program-length commercials. Since the Dakin plush was nearly identical to the doll used in the Backyard Gang videos and was being sold in stores, using it on television risked the show appearing like an advertisement for the toy. And so, custom dolls were created exclusively for the studio, while Dakin continued producing the retail versions. And with that, Barney and Friends premiered on PBS, where it would completely explode in popularity. Suddenly, Dakin was no longer making a niche fan club toy for a small Texas video series. It had one of the hottest children's characters in America. Former Lions Group employee Debbie Bodden-Rees recalled that more than 40,000 early-style Barneys were produced, along with roughly 60,000 miniature promotion dolls. But even those numbers could not keep up with Barneymania. By early '93, the fan club had around 2,600,000 members. Millions of videos had been sold, and stores could barely keep Barney merchandise in stock. FAO Schwartz had nearly sold out, and Macy's was down to a few comforters. One Toys R Us employee reportedly warned customers that 6 newly arrived boxes of Dakin dolls could be gone within hours. And so, Dakin expanded into a full retail line. Barney got a new open-to-mouth design with plastic eyes, yellow feet, and his name embroidered underneath. And naturally, there were variations: regular Barney, giant Barney, full-body puppets, Baby Bop dolls, rare Christmas editions, and even a whole line of mini doll outfits called Barneyware. Whew. At the 1993 Toy Fair, Dakin displayed the new products with Barney himself appearing at its showroom, and suddenly, they were one of the biggest companies in that room. By the end of that year, Barney products had reportedly generated more than $500 million in retail sales, and Dakin was one of the biggest companies cashing in. After Garfield's decline, Barney looks like the character that could save Dakin. But the unprecedented merchandise boom naturally cooled almost as quickly as it began. By 1994, stores were shrinking their Barney sections, replacing them with newer properties like The Lion King, and industry sources estimated that Dakin's Barney sales had fallen by as much as 90%. Barney himself remained popular, let's not get twisted, but the problem was that children already owned the doll, probably several of them. They didn't need another one. Barney had given Dakin one final massive hit, but it was not enough to make the company stable again. In 1995, Robert Solomon arranged for Dakin to merge with its longtime rival, Applause. The idea was that the two companies would stop playing against each other for the same licenses, and they'd combine their distribution and become large enough to survive the toy industry's constant cycle of sudden crazes and equally sudden collapses. Dakin brought Barney, Garfield, Snoopy, and its reputation in stuffed animals, while Applause brought Disney, Warner Bros., Sesame Street, and a much larger licensing operation. Together, they employed around 900 people and generated roughly $175 million in annual sales. It looked like Dakin had finally found some security, except the combined company would be called Applause Enterprises. Dakin remained a brand on certain products, but the independent company founded 40 years earlier was gone. Robert became a consultant and left the industry under a 5-year non-compete agreement. Applause initially continued growing, but by 2001, it was reportedly nearly $100 million in debt and on the verge of foreclosure. The company shut down, and around 500 employees suddenly lost their jobs. But then Robert came back. His non-compete had expired, and after learning that Applause was about to collapse, he organized an investment group, purchased Applause's assets, and reopened the company only days later as Applause LLC. Nearly all of its employees were invited back, and Solomon claimed that sales quickly began improving. They even secured the merchandising rights to the Shrek movie. This was now the second struggling plush company Robert had stepped in to rescue, and once again, it seemed like he might have pulled it off. By 2004, Applause was in trouble once again. The company attempted to revive those original dream pets under the Dakin name, bringing the story all the way back to those 6 animals packed around a box at trains. But the revival failed to recreate the original craze, and Applause began losing the licensed characters that had stuck by the company for decades. Most damagingly, Disney ended its 22-year relationship with them that June. Applause continued spiraling, losing partners, prepared to leave its longtime headquarters, and began negotiating the sale of its name and assets to rival gift company Russ Berrie. The rescue had run out of road. On August 20th, 2004, Robert Solomon was found dead in his home in Woodlands Hills, California. Police confirmed the cause of death was suicide. I'm not going to pretend that a person's death can be neatly explained by the financial condition of a company. It can't. What I can say is that on the final day of his life, Robert was still publicly trying to save Applause. Only hours before his death, he had spoken optimistically about its chances of surviving, even as it faced lawsuits, eviction, and the loss of nearly its entire workforce. For more than a decade, Robert had been the man brought in when a plush company was dying. He'd already helped guide Dakin through bankruptcy, rebuilt it as Applause, and given the company a second life. But this time, there would be no third rescue. 11 days later, creditors filed an involuntary bankruptcy petition against Applause. That October, its trademarks and remaining assets were sold to Russ Berrie for $7.55 million. Some products briefly continued under variations of the Dakin name, but the company that began with European shotguns built an empire from packing material and produced Barney's first official doll was finished. But you see, a company does not disappear as cleanly as the paperwork would suggest. Its factories can close, its employees can leave, and its trademarks can be sold, but the millions of toys it created remain in bedrooms and toy boxes and family photographs from all around the world. They became childhood companions, collectibles, and eventually pieces of a bygone era. Dream pets are still collected more than half a century later. Dakin's Garfield dolls remain instantly recognizable, and thousands of its Barney toys are still being bought and collected and passed down today, often by people who have no idea how enormous Dakin became or how much tragedy existed behind the name on the tag. That might be the strangest part of this story. Dakin survived the loss of nearly an entire family, grew into one of the world's largest plush manufacturers, endured major recalls, collapsed, returned under a new name, and eventually vanished for good. Yet, more than 35 years after Barney's first official doll was released, it's still here. The company is gone and the world that created it is no longer existing, but the doll continues to be preserved and loved. That is the complicated legacy of Barney's first toy company. Something born from decades of ambition, success, turmoil, and tragedy that ultimately outlived nearly everything responsible for creating it. And that thing was a small, cute little dinosaur plush, still doing exactly what it was created to do: being loved. I hope you enjoyed this video. There were some heavy moments there, but ultimately, I'm glad I got to tell this story. I make deep dives into the forgotten history of the Barney franchise and brand, so consider subscribing if you'd like to see more stories like this one. You can also become a channel member Desky for extra videos, early access, voting in polls, custom badges and emojis, and access to our Discord server. As always, I've been the BarneyDesk, and thanks for watching.